rule whether or not the EPA has the authority to impose arbitrary restrictions on carbon dioxide emissions, especially for power plants, without congressional authorization. And the federal courts, both federal courts, ruled that in fact they did not have that authorization, that they were overstepping the limits of their authority. So that much is true. The news media is still hopeless. Every day I listen to ABC, NBC, all the major news networks, and I'm appalled at what they're saying. They're saying, oh, it's getting hotter than ever. When you hear a weather report and say, well, it's 4 degrees warmer today than the average, you think that's a result of global warming, is what they're saying and implying, which is, of course, simply weather, and it's not true. In the back, too.
Sea level rise is kind of finicky. Or Alaska, where you have the Pacific Plate subducting there, you have sea level going down. Eastern coast of the United States is passive, it's sinking, sea level's rising. Here we have isostatic rebound, loss of the ice, the rival Olympic Peninsula. What's the latest research say? Are we still having receding sea level here?
Okay, the latest work on sea levels has just been published. Actually, it's in a book that I just published with Elsevier, which had multiple authors. I didn't write the whole thing. And one of them is one of the world's leading sea level experts, and he has shown that it's unrealistic to expect to get more than probably 1 or 2 feet in the next century. And the reasoning is like this. Well, we had these huge climate shifts and huge amounts of warming in the last ice age. We had gigantic amounts of water tied up in these ice caps, the equivalent of 400 feet of sea level rise from the time that the ice had tied up all the water till the time it all melted. And even in those times, the maximum rate of rise was 1 meter a century. Well, they're predicting 7 meters a century with no glaciers to melt.
That's the only thing I need to worry about is harbor becoming dry.
Yeah, go ahead.
Thank you.
Stand up, Lisa.
Have you ever been invited to set forth your positions at Hudson College? If yes, then what was the reception of your talk? If no, what does it say about the tenor of supposed public discussion of this vital issue?
The answer to your question is no. I have never been invited to talk about climate to Huxley, nor am I likely to be. I think, which is okay. You know, I don't care. I've given many talks at Western, however, on my views about climate. And when I say my views, my approach is what you've seen today. Here's the data. You make up your own mind. I'm going to try to tell you what it means. You can see for yourself what it means. I give lectures all over the country at universities. From time to time, I speak at international meetings and that sort of thing. And there is a dogmatic resistance among the people who believe in CO2 to even recognize the data that is contrary to their beliefs. It's almost like a religion. It's absolutely dogmatic. And they will not debate. They won't appear on the same stage with you to debate them. That rarely happens, once in a great while. I invited Al Gore to come to a Geological Society of America meeting to debate it, and of course he didn't show up, nor is he likely to. But anyway, the answer to your question is no. And what's happening though is that because of the internet, there is a lot of data that's flooding through the internet, because the CO2 people have also taken control of almost all the editorial boards of major scientific publishers, journal publishers, who are the normal outlets for the research of the folks like me. And I cannot get a publication through any of these major normal outlets as long as I say anything bad about CO2. And I don't say anything bad about CO2, I just say, here's the evidence for what happened, without even mentioning the word CO2. And it will come back saying, sorry, we don't accept papers like that.
What is the IPCC?
The IPCC is the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change. And it is a UN panel that was formed back in the late 1880s for the express purposes of showing that CO2 was going to cause a lot of climatic change and therefore do a lot of harm to that's in their charter. That's why they were formed. It isn't to investigate, it's to show that that's what was going to happen.
It's a UN. It's a UN thing.
UN, it's a UN.
What about the rest of the science community? Put the CO2 dogmatist in one area, but what about the rest of the science community? So more skepticism being developed
I'm so glad you asked that, because I didn't have time to mention that. I was going to, but I didn't. There is what's loosely referred to in the press as a scientific consensus. And the statement is made that 97% of all scientists in the world agree that CO2 is the cause of global warming. You hear that over and over and over. It's repeated by scientists, it's repeated by colleagues of mine. And so if you look into where that 97% comes from, here's where it comes. It was a master's degree study at an Indiana university by a graduate student who selected 79 climate so-called experts, all of whom were pro-CO2, and asked them the question, do you believe CO2 is causing moderate global warming? Well, it turned out that there were 2 disbelievers who didn't accept it, so they got 77 out of 79, and that's the 97% that they're quoting over and over and over. You hear it everywhere. That's the so-called consensus. It's 77 out of 79 climate scientists selected arbitrarily for their viewpoints. The other side of that coin is there was a fellow in our hall at Oregon who started collecting signatures where you had to sign your name to essentially a statement that said, we do not see any evidence for CO2 as a cause of global warming, nor do we believe that it is a threat to humanity. Guess how many signatures he has signed? These are all, you have to be a scientist to sign this. That means you have to have a degree in one of the sciences. 80% of IPC is non-scientists. Only 20% of the IPC is scientists. So you got 32,000 signatures. So right now, the score of skeptics, if you want to call people like me skeptics, versus true believers is 32,000 to 77 that we know about. There are a few hundred more in the IPCC, but that's the real consensus. And those numbers you can affirm for yourself. They're all posted online. You can look at every name that's on that 32,000 list.
As you said here today, that feeding the population is probably the biggest concern that we have to deal with, and energy is what we're going to need to do that. So what's your thoughts on where we're going with energy in the United States?
2 sentences or less.
I have to be careful what I say here. My belief is we need fewer kids. That's the only realistic solution, I think, because we reach a point somewhere down the line where the Earth can no longer really sustain that many people for food and for energy. And so for energy, right now, if you just look at the short term and don't look at the long term, and look at coping with, say, the next couple of decades of the population increase and with or without global cooling, what are the sources of energy right now? It's about half coal-fired power plants. The rest is natural gas, nuclear, petroleum-based products for the power, wind power, and solar power less than 1%, something like that. There's no way you can convert that much energy from those other sources of power into so-called sustainable power. I wish it were, but you would have to cover the entire globe with solar panels and windmills to do that, and then you don't have a place to live. So, fortunately, what is happening now in the U.S. is that there have been huge amounts of petroleum and natural gas that have been found in the Dakotas, you've probably read about, and the new process called fracking, which is shattering of shale to release the natural gas to come to the surface, huge resources. If we develop that and gradually transfer to a lot more power generation from natural gas, from these almost limitless resources, we can get away from coal, which is a dirty way to make power, no doubt about it. So I would hope we would develop our resources, energy resources, at home from natural gas and from our own petroleum reserves, and we don't need the Middle East if we do that.
Would you venture a guess at the... Oh, excuse me. Thanks. Would you venture a guess as to when the line of temperature crosses the line of population, i.e. the world can no longer support any further population gain and it's on a downward trend?
I have no idea. To answer your question, but what I can tell you is this. that what's going to happen in the next couple of decades is that with global cooling, which is almost a slam dunk, there's going to be less food production and greater population. It means that literally millions and millions of people are going to starve to death in third world countries. That's a sad, but I think probably a true fact. I wish it weren't true, but I think it probably is. And there's not a whole lot that we can do about it. You can't raise food that fast for that many new people. And so, to me, it would make sense that we try to approach the problem from both ends. Derive better ways to produce food and produce fewer people. Way in the corner.
Do you believe coal causes global warming?
That what is?
Coal.
Burning.
Oh, yeah, no. Of course not.
Right.
Coal produces a lot of stuff. It emits a lot of toxic things, toxic metals that are bad for you, and attempts are being made to clean it up. And there have been big improvements made in cleaning that up. CO2 is not a problem. CO2 is not going to do anything. I mean, if you double nothing, what do you got? You still got nothing. There's not enough CO2 in the atmosphere, and it doesn't have an effect. You can prove with the physics of it that the effect of CO2 is incapable of causing global warming of more than about 1/10 of 1 degree, which is about the measurement error that we have. Anybody over here? Yeah.
In your presentation, it appears that the oceans have a significant impact on climate, and you're showing graphs where it's cooling and then it's warmer. Do we understand why the oceans get cooler or warmer to cause the impact they do?
The true answer to your question is no, we don't. We have some really good ideas, and they amount to this, that when we look at what's going on with the sun, we have a really good record of the behavior of the sun in terms of its magnetic field and what's called its irradiance, which means how much energy is warming. And that evidence shows a perfect correlation with global climate. So goes the sun, so goes our climate. It's like two people dancing in step over a lot of ups and downs for a long period of time.
Yeah.
And there is now new work which has come out of the accelerator experiments at CERN, Switzerland, which is a big nuclear physics facility, that shows that when the magnetic field of the sun is low, it no longer shields the Earth as effectively and allows more radiation to reach the Earth, which causes ionization in the upper atmosphere. That just means it does some interactions with atoms in the upper atmosphere that serve as cloud nuclei. And condensation forms around those ionized particles and makes clouds. Cloud cover reflects energy. And so when you plot the cloud cover versus the climate change, again, you get a one-to-one correspondence. What you don't probably know is that we have just entered what's called a grand solar minimum, which means that the sun's magnetic field is taking a nosedive. And that's bad news, because every time it's done that in the past, the last 5 times it's done that, we've had significant global cooling. It's doing that right now. We've just entered a phase called a grand solar minimum. So that's what we look forward to. There is a lot of evidence that shows that there's such a good correlation between solar effects, namely magnetic field and irradiance, that it's almost impossible to get away from the fact that the sun is really what's driving our climate. And the mechanism of how those changes, solar changes, get transferred to the ocean, we don't know, because guess what? Guess where all the money's going? All the research money that we're already putting into that, so we know what's happening, is going into CO2 propaganda. Other questions?
No, actually,
No.
no.
Okay.
I'm afraid that we're out of time. How about a big round of applause for this? And thank you all. We have 118 people here in this program, which is a record for the Business Club. We are adjourned. Remember, next month We have Dennis Murphy, and it will also be just a terrific program.